This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so I'm going to start things up. I want to welcome everyone to our sixth installment of the NWBA webinar series presented by ABC Medical. And tonight we have the pleasure of talking about the topic of Team Reviewer 101, basically the basics of becoming a team reviewer and all the things you should know about being a team reviewer in the NWBA. Just to set some ground rules for everyone, if you're on the call, I appreciate everyone that's muted themselves. Anyone that joins, mute themselves. We'll have an opportunity at the end for questions. You can type questions in the chat box at any time, and we'll address those questions throughout the presentation. But outside of that, we hope that you find this to be very informative. Similar to all our other topics, we feel like we bring some education that will add to your knowledge in this space, or maybe a lack of knowledge. So I'll kind of get things started. So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to our sponsor for the webinar series, ABC Medical. So if you're not familiar with ABC Medical, they're one of the nation's leading urological medical suppliers. They provide a comprehensive list of medical supplies, but they've been a longtime partner of the NWBA and a really valued partner. And so they've created some very unique opportunities for programming within our organization, such as scholarship program and other things partnering with our collegiate division. So a great partner of ours. We appreciate them supporting this webinar series and just want to say thank you to them. Now I have the pleasure of introducing, when it comes up here, my co-host for tonight. You can forget about the ugly guy on the right. But I want to say it's truly an honor to be on this webinar tonight to present with Janie Chaluti. I can read her bio here verbatim, but I will say one thing I wanted to add is amongst my involvement with this organization, I would be hard-pressed to find another volunteer that's put in the time, the effort, and kind of the passion to our sport and our organization that Janie does. So truly just from the standpoint of what she does for behind the scenes for our sport and our athletes, I don't think a lot of people know. So I'm using this opportunity to say thank you, Janie. Thank you in advance for educating us all more tonight. But then thank you for everything you do for the organization. It's truly really, really valued by all of us. And thank you so much. But on the note of her credentials, she's obviously by day occupational therapist and head classifier for our organization. She's been involved when the classification was a medical system and really helped us transition in 14-15 to a functional classification system. She's conducted a number of classification courses, training a number of our current classifiers within the NWBA, and also has developed criteria which we'll go over here for the certification process for team reviewers, both at the adult and junior level. And in addition to that, she also holds classification status at the international level with the IWBF, both as a classifier and a practicing instructor. Janie's been also involved at the grassroots level, but as I mentioned, again, I just want to say, I think you guys should all feel very privileged to have such a expert to presenting in this space to you on classification, team reviewer, and all things in this realm. So on that note, I'm going to jump into our first slides for this evening. So you don't yet get to hear from the expert that is Janie, as we're co-presenting here. So I do want to start off by setting the table of team reviewer. When we look at this role and when we look at teams, there's kind of three administrative roles that are key to the success of any team. And those three roles are team representative, coach, and team reviewer. So many on here or that might be watching this later understand these roles. Team representative definitely is one that helps organize all the administrative operations for a team, from a budget to fundraising to getting the team registered to all the fun aspects that go there. And then coach obviously gets to provide the instruction and strategy on court play. But a lot of times forgotten, but even keel with those other two roles is the team reviewer for any team. And you're going to hear us echo that throughout tonight. I think it's a role within our organization and within any team that both Janie and I and many leaders within the NWBA understand the crucial role you serve when we look into you're really the advisor for your team, your local club, in the space of eligibility, classification, all of these things. So you should look to, when you're serving in that role, to educate yourself on those as much as possible, which we will get to. You won't become an expert, we get that, but educating yourself the best and the most you can it'll go a long way for the success of your team in those areas. So I kind of hit on a little there, the importance of team reviewer. This is really calling out team reviewers are going to be amongst the first formal interactions an athlete has when addressing eligibility and classification. So the example I'd like to use in this is when a new athlete is invited to a team practice or a program, which we all do it in different ways of seeing a sport, one of the first interactions outside of maybe the coach or the team rep should definitely be with that team reviewer. And that's going to help us all address the eligibility criteria of that potential athlete right out of the gate. Obviously, we all know there's eligibility criteria to play our sport, and having that person that's trained in that space, that team reviewer, having that conversation early, so we're not getting down the road and they're competing in games and we're getting to places like second tournament for a team or nationals where an athlete, and I use that example because you guys would be shocked at the times we've seen individuals that haven't met the obvious eligibility standards and no one's kind of raised their hand and then, hey, should this athlete went through the formal process of eligibility with the NWBA? And they likely should have. And yes, they might be eligible, but they should have went through that formal process for applying for eligibility, which we'll go over. And then, the next one here that I just want to call the importance of team reviewers is classification is critical to the integrity of play in our sport. And this includes the ability to field legal lineups. So when we think about this, it's super critical that you as a team reviewer are able to set those classification points for your team and other teams. So then you're playing a classification point and a legal lineup that, would be fair for all. I don't think any of us would want a team out there playing with an 18 or 20 point lineup because someone didn't, with a keen eye, take a look at their athletes properly when they were proposing classifications. And you looking at opposing teams, which we'll get into. And then the last one, as I just alluded to there, is like you're just as important to your opponent teams and their athletes' classifications, because we're not, like we keep saying, don't expect you to be experts in this space, and use the other team reviewers that you compete against, and they can help you come up with a good classification for your athletes. So you're going to find yourself being just as important to your team as you are to other teams. So I guess I'll move on to the next section, which is talking about the process of becoming a team reviewer. You know, this is something that, you know, I will say is, you know, there's a formal process here, but I would be remiss to make this statement. I know Jane, you definitely would. You are not a classifier. A team reviewer is not a classifier, and there's a more formal process if you are interested in becoming a classifier. But you are at least trained at the level that on the fundamentals of classification to provide those initial classifications for review. So each team must have at least one team reviewer, and that team reviewer must also register as a non-athlete. Important note there, guys, is even if you have if you're a member of an adult team, and you're going to have an athlete member of that team get the team reviewer certification, we need to have them register as a non-athlete with the organization, because there's policies and procedures that role takes on an authority figure role where safe sport, background screening, other policies come into play and need to be, they need to be registered for the role they're serving in, i.e. team reviewer, which is a role that can be selected in non-athlete registration. Very similar to an athlete that coaches. He needs to register as a non-athlete because of that same reason, not just as an athlete. And then, you know, the certification is valid for 2 years, and there are 2 separate courses for team reviewers, one for adult and one for juniors. And if you are planning to serve in the team reviewer role for a junior team and an adult team, you need to be certified in both courses because the course material is different. And as we know, for some of those that are aware, the classification point system is different between those two. Junior division uses a different classification system, so being educated in that space doesn't just necessarily transition over to the adult division, and vice versa. So you've probably heard enough Brandon talking, so now I'm going to finally hand it over to the real expert in this space, Janie, and she can speak more on the next topic.
So in terms of classification, the US is huge. And when we were transferring to the functional system, tried to figure out how we can make this work. So what we came up with was the team reviewer role. And this is the first phase of classification, the first step. So you observe the players, new players on a team, and make a proposed classification, which is designated by the letter P, and this cannot be changed once the player has played. The next step is during competition. 2 other team reviewers need to complete the classification form with their opinion of the classification. The player can then get an approved status, meaning that at least 2 team reviewers agree on the classification. This may be different than the proposed classification, and that's why we put this in there. It's kind of our way to have a check and balance system. The player's classification will remain an approved status until they're seen by a formal classification panel, which would be step 3. Technically, how our policies are written is that this approved status is good for 1.5 seasons. That way, because a player may not always be available to go to the classification tournament that the team goes to. So we allow that flexibility to be able to have a season and a half. Also, not everyone starts in the very beginning of a season. So, but after that point, after that December 31st of the second season the player is played, they cannot play until they're seen by a classification panel. And this is really, again, part of that check and balance system, that people are classified properly, and going back to having the legal lineups that we talked about. The players that then observed in competition by a classification panel. The panel's decision is then a confirmed classification, which would be indicated as a... This can be changed by another classification panel during competition, or if the player asks for a review. So this is the classification roster form. On this, we did make some changes just in the last couple weeks. So this is the form that's actually on the website right now. You put the player's jersey number, you put the player's name, and what your proposed classification is, and your reason for that proposed classification. Then on the bottom, team reviewer, your team reviewer number 1, you sign it, you put your name, your team, and your date. At the next game you go to where there is another team reviewer, they're going to sign under team reviewer 2 and put what they think the classification is. The third team reviewer will do the same thing, and then whatever 2 are the same is what the player's class might be. So in example 2, Joel Embiid from Philly, player 1 put 3.0. So when you reviewed your own player, you thought he was a 3. Team reviewer 2 and team reviewer 3 thought the player was a 3.5. When that goes into the national office, they will be made a 3.5 approved status. Okay, does that make sense? So that's our check and balance. That the reason we did it this way is we felt the one that's going to be most critical in looking at classifications of another team is the team you're going to be playing against. So you're always going to want to make sure that the team you're playing against is playing with a fair classification and not kind of dumbing their numbers down to make it better for themselves. So this form is then sent to Brandon, and he will enter the classifications. And this gets sent in within 72 hours of getting it signed off. So if you went to one tournament and 2 of the players played and were able to be signed off on and not the third, still send it in. Get those 2 done and in the system, and then when the third one gets seen by all the team reviewers, send that one in. Doesn't need to be faxed in, doesn't need to be scanned and sent electronically. You can simply take a picture of the form and email it to Brandon. So as simple as we can make it, so you can get it in and we can get it on the official roster. Teams at tournaments are supposed to be going to the roster that's on the NWBA site. So we want to make sure your player statuses and classifications are accurate when they go to a tournament. So the way the policy is written is a team reviewer that do not submit approved rosters can be fined $200 of a team fee, and the team might be ineligible for postseason play. How this comes in is when it gets to be nationals and we're looking at your eligible games and you have all these players that still have proposed classifications, you may have been playing up too many points or playing down too many points. Half a point here, half a point there. That's a whole point on the court different. So that's why it's important that these forms be submitted early so we can make sure that the lineup you've been playing with, the lineup that made you eligible to go to nationals, is a legal lineup. So tried to make some helpful tips. I really think this is difficult. You go through a very long, and I know it's a long course to be a team reviewer, and everything is online. And I get we're getting much better at doing things like that now. But you don't get the benefit of having the interaction of a course and having the discussion of a course and talking things out till you get a better understanding of, gee, that's why that makes sense. So what we want you to know is no one expects you to know everything. And even after you went through a classification course, no one expects you to know everything. So it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay that if you have a proposed classification and you're really not sure about it and it changes, that's okay. Take your time and try and observe the player as much as you can to make that decision. Because once you make that proposed class, that's what the player is playing with. So keep your materials with you for reference. I always have my classification book with me when I'm at a tournament. I went to the Paralympics in 2012 in London, and at every game, I had my classification manuals with me. All of us had our manuals with us to be able to reference during the games. So there's nothing wrong with pulling it out, particularly those amputee charts. That takes a lot of memory to know what the difference between greater than 2/3, less than 2/3, what different combinations are. Don't just try and guess it. Use your charts. You have it there. Take advantage of it. The other thing is, usually when we're at a game, we don't even know what the score is. We don't know what's happened when we're classifying because we're not watching if the ball went in when the player shot it. We're watching how the player approached the shot and then what happened to their balance in their hands after they took a shot or after they were hit when they were taking the shot or when they were trying to get a rebound. So we're looking at that balance, that volume of action, that stability, that use of hands. That's what makes a difference in the classification. So it's really important to be aware and to always be looking, where's that offhand? If you're looking at somebody between a 2-5 and a 3 or a 1-5 and a 2, you want to see, are they using their hands? So look for those offhands. Look to see if they're hooking on the back of their backrest for those 1 to 1-5s, and you're not sure if they're rotating. So you need to take your time and look for those things. The functional system is new for all of us. We're all still trying to get that kind of Rolodex in our head of what the different classes look like. So if you have the opportunity to have a roster in front of you of another team, then look and see, well, this one is a confirmed 2-5. Let me watch him play so I can get a better idea of what a 2-5 looks like or what a 3-5 looks like or what the difference between a 3-5 and a 4 and a 4-5. Let me watch them on the court. Doing that also lets you work on your observation skills and being able to watch and look for different things. It would be very nice if everything worked as a checklist and the players did everything we wanted in the order we wanted so we could just check off what we see, but it doesn't work that way. And sometimes you're watching one player and all of a sudden another player catches your eye because of the contact or because of how they were trying to rebound. So take advantage of when you're at games and watch your known players, what class they are. And sometimes it may be trying to watch and trying to classify them and then looking at the roster later and seeing how close you were. Classifiers have an advantage. We work in panels. So we're going to have 2 to 3 of us always together being able to talk it out, being able to think it out with each other, being able to catch what someone else didn't catch and to be able to see more. So if you have the opportunity and you're at a tournament and there's other team reviewers there, then see if you can sit together and do that and try and work in a panel to do those approved statuses. Several conferences actually set it up that the team reviewers are going to go around as a panel and looking at everybody to work off everybody's approved status together. It'll make you a better team reviewer to be able to work with other people. You're going to learn, you're going to be able to have those discussions, and you're going to be able to start seeing some of those minor things that make a difference. Classification is based on observation during competition, not during side court simulated tasks. We all know the player that if we have them on the side court, we can put the ball in front of them and they can pick it up, or they can catch a ball out to the side. But in the speed of the game, they just don't have the coordination to do that. They don't have the hand-eye coordination when you're going through a faster game to be able to do that. So that's why it's important during competition. That's what makes this a player-friendly system. So pulling someone out of practice and trying to pass them the ball and trying to have them hold the ball over their head or trying to reach out to the side, that may show you they have the potential to be a 3-5, but it's actually in the game. Can they do it with the speed and control during a game? And you need to trust yourself. So you took this very long course. You have an idea of what's going on. So you need to trust those observations and those decisions. And don't just sign off on another team's proposed classification if you think it's off a little bit. You can put down what you think it is. You have every right to do that. And that's what you're supposed to do. Or if you're not sure, you can try and watch them in another game. If they didn't get enough playing time and the coach put them in for the last minute of a game, you don't need to sign off on that form. Classifiers do not sign off and give somebody a classification if we didn't have enough observation time. So you are well within your rights not to sign off on a proposed classification form. So, eligibility. Team reviewers are really the first stopgap when we're looking at eligibility. So team reviewers, lots of times you're going to have a coach, another player, or that player come up and say, hey, well, am I eligible? You need to kind of sit down and have a talk and look and see what's going on to determine if they're eligible. So it's important for you to be familiar with what that eligibility criteria is. It's also important for you to know that if an ineligible player has played in a game, your team may have to forfeit those games. So you don't want that to happen. You want to try and make this process completed as early as possible in the season. So we're going to review the eligibility process and the eligibility policies and procedures. So the first thing is it needs to be a permanent lower extremity disability. It needs to consistently reduce the function in the lower limbs. So it's not intermittent weakness. Needs to be objectively verified, which means we need to be able to have X-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, EMGs, nerve conduction. We need to have a valid test that shows us that it is a permanent lower extremity disability. If someone has a hip or a knee replacement, we just need to see an X-ray to confirm that they've had the hip or knee replacement, and they can be eligible. If someone has an amputation, it needs to be what we call the first ray of 1 foot. So I do get asked this all the time. Well, if someone just loses their pinky toe, are they eligible? The answer is no. So the first ray of the foot is the great toe plus the first bone after the great toe. The reason for this is when we walk or run, we actually push off from the ball of your foot or that great toe is. So you need to be missing that push off point. That's where we push off when we walk, when we run, and when we try and pivot or when we jump. So that's why the first ray of the foot is what's essential. They're missing more than that, yes, they're eligible, but that's our minimal criteria. The other instance is a leg length discrepancy. The criteria we're using is 6 centimeters. A 6 centimeter difference between one leg and the other leg. And it's from the greater trochanter, which is kind of like the top of your leg bone, down to the ground. This is usually done by a standing x-ray, but that's very expensive. So it can be taken by a classifier, but it needs to be a 6 centimeter difference. We do not use that for the junior division because 6 centimeters in a junior is very different. And at that point, they're still growing. So that 6 centimeter leg length discrepancy does not apply to juniors. So the next thing is looking at findings such as soft tissue contracture. A soft tissue is going to be a tendon or a ligament, edema, which is swelling, disuse atrophy, which is the muscle wasting away because you haven't been using it, or symptoms such as pain and numbness without another objective finding. So if someone has disuse atrophy or someone has a soft tissue contracture, but their x-rays show that they've got arthritic changes, they would be eligible. So they're the things we have to look at. But this would apply to someone that maybe has an ACL tear. So one ACL tear, it's giving them some soft tissue contracture, they're not going to be eligible. But if they've had multiple tears and they've had to go in and do surgery to realign the knee to kind of shift where they're putting their weight, then that's an objective finding that could make them eligible. So that's where we really need to have discussions with the players on eligibility. The other thing is that temporary disability is not considered eligible. So this is someone who may be non-weight bearing for a period of time, or this is someone who may be casted to stretch out a tendon for a period of time. They're not eligible. And it's not eligible if you're told, well, you just need to do stretching or you need to do surgery. That's not considered a permanent disability. If someone is still in the rehabilitative phase of getting some foot surgery done, it doesn't mean they're going to be eligible. So our biggest thing is if someone does not have a disability which can be seen by observation alone, so that when they come in the gym and they're in shorts and their legs look exactly the same on both sides, they're going to need to apply for eligibility. So if when you look at them, you can't say or you can't see that they have a disability, then they're going to need to apply for eligibility. This doesn't necessarily apply for your paras because they have a disability. If you ask them to move, they're not able to. But if you see someone coming in and both legs look about the same and they're moving, then you're going to need to help guide them through that player eligibility process. And you need to help them. This is not an easy process. Once someone goes through the process and they're determined to be eligible, they will get an email through Sport Engine saying that they're eligible. They need to take this letter with them because another team reviewer is looking at them and they don't see an obvious disability. If they don't have that letter saying they've been cleared to play, that team reviewer should not sign off. And if they get to a national event and they don't have that letter and the classification panel asks for it, they will not get a classification. So they need to carry that letter with them when they're going to classification tournaments. So in essence, when in doubt, apply. So it's your role to really determine that a player needs to apply. It's very sad when we've gotten to nationals and we've had people as a 4 or 5 and we've been contacting them beforehand, and they don't have an eligible disability, or we're trying to get this process done in 2 weeks before they go to nationals. So it really is your responsibility to look for that eligibility. And it's your responsibility as a team reviewer, if there's a player on another team that you're being asked to look at and you do not see an obvious disability, you should not sign off on that form. So the eligibility is looking at, if you go to the NWBA website, under the classification tab, there is a process for looking at eligibility. This is a medical review process. This is the time where we are now medically oriented. The information needs to be medical testing, a letter from the doctor saying that Joe is a great guy and he's got a problem with his knee and loves to play basketball, and the doctor thinks this is a great sport for him, is not going to be sufficient. We're going to need to have a medical diagnosis. We're going to need to have that it is a permanent lower extremity disability. So these are the people that might have arthritis in their back. So yeah, running and jumping and playing able-bodied ball is not the best sport for them to be doing, but it's not a permanent lower extremity disability, having an arthritis in their back. So the eligibility committee require more than a letter from the doctor. We'll need x-rays or scans or EMGs or whatever objective testing there is. Sometimes it's tests that physical therapy can do, which is certain balance tests, certain measurements, certain muscle testing that can help us get a picture so that we can approve them to be eligible. Again, if you're asked to sign off on a form for another team, for a player that doesn't have an obvious disability, don't do that. And I will tell you, we've had team reviewers contact Brandon and myself to say, I was asked to sign this form. I don't think I didn't see a disability, and we've had to go back and follow up on that. And we really appreciate you being the front line. We don't want to have these problems with teams coming to nationals. We don't want to have problems with teams having to forfeit games. So as early as we can do this, it's got the best for everybody, and it's the best for the player that they don't have to worry about this. So we went through the process, and the player got a classification, and for some reason, they don't agree with it. This is a player-friendly system. The player has the right to ask for a review. So we don't call them protests anymore, because a protest makes it sound like it's a us and them kind of thing. So we ask for a review. This is again on the NWBA website under the classification tab on how to do that. It is a $150 fee upon applying, but you get that money back if the classification is changed. So it's a form that the player can fill out, and you can help them fill it out. And it simply says, this is what my current classification is. This is why I think it's not right. And describe it. We don't need medical terms or anything. We need terms like, you made me a 2 and I can't turn to my right side. Or they made me a 3-5, but I can't lean out to the side. So try and go back, try and think of those classification terms that you know, and the differences between a 2, a 2-5, a 2-5, and a 3, and try and use that. This is then going to go to the classifiers at the next classification tournament the player's at. So as much as you can use our common terminology for classification, that's going to help them better understand what to look for. My recommendation is, if you fill out a request for review and the player goes to a classification tournament, I would bring a copy of that rationale that you wrote, and I would give that copy to the panel. And I would try and make time for the player to talk to the panel to explain why they think it should change. And that's for a couple reasons. One, the panel can then really identify that player that they need to look at, and they don't have to worry about looking for which jersey number is coming in. And it gives the panel an opportunity to ask questions. And if, say for instance, the reason for the review might be an upper extremity impairment, it gives the panel the opportunity to really look at the hand or the upper extremity to see what the impairment is, and then to really look at that while the player's playing. So it's really to the player's advantage to come up and talk to the panel, bring the form, let them know who they are, introduce themselves, and why they want to be reviewed. If this is an opportunity for you also to work with the coach. The coach needs to get the player to get the playing time so the classifiers can make this change if possible. So to be able to communicate to the coach that they need the playing time, for you to introduce yourself to the panel, to tell them if there's anything you need, let me know. So the panel knows who to go to say, you know what, when is the coach going to play them? We'll be there for that half. Just tell us when to be there. So you can become that key person to communicate between the two. If it's changed, the classification panel sends the report to the national office, and that $150 is refunded. If it is not changed, then that is the fee for the review. If a player is deemed ineligible, they go through the same process. However, if a player is deemed ineligible, they cannot play. They will only go through the medical eligibility process. What usually happens then is Brandon and I talk, and we talk to the eligibility panel and committee and try and figure out what it is they're looking for, what specific information they want, what more can the player provide to help them. That is all communicated to the player. So that does not go to the team reviewer. But if you know a player has submitted for eligibility or submitted for a review or submitted for a review of their eligibility, you can keep on them because there is a timeline to this, and we give 30 days from a decision. So if a player was deemed ineligible, they have 30 days to ask for a review. So if they want that review, you can help them by kind of nudging them along. The second decision by the eligibility committee will be considered final and will not be appealable. So we tried to get some information, and this is on the NWBA website under the classification tab. So that's where that classification roster is. So you can get that, you can print it out, you can use it. The other things that are there for your reference are a worksheet. This is the same worksheet the classifiers use. This is the same worksheet we use internationally. It just gives you a space to be able to write notes. So you can do this for your player, or you can do this when you're trying to observe a player from another team. They may have 3 players and you're trying to keep track of what you saw from what one, and it's a way to try and keep it all together for you. The other form is a game format. And so this actually has a space where it's 2 teams, 2 whole rosters that can be on there that you can look at, and you can just kind of check off what class they are. So I'll be honest, I don't usually use that form when I'm classifying because it doesn't give me enough space to write my notes. But I do use that form when I'm trying to observe other teams to get practice, to be able to watch and, kind of challenge myself when I don't have anyone to observe, and I can watch a game and just kind of pick out what I think the classes are and why, just so I can try and improve my skills. So that's what I think that form is helpful for me. So this is where we can open it up. If people have any questions for us, if you have specific questions on what you're doing or what you need to do, or questions on the classes, Brandon and I had talked about this, and we did not make it a classification webinar going over the different classes. We really tried to focus in on questions team reviewers have had that have come up to our level to try and help with. So does anyone have questions?
And I'll add one while some of you guys maybe think of some questions. One thing I would definitely challenge anyone on here that serves in team review or anyone watches this, I would definitely ensure that if you're attending a sanctioned event and you're planning to compete in games, those sanction holders and the opposing team should definitely be coordinating with you that you're going to have a team reviewer present. You need to have team reviewers present for your games. So, hey, we have 2 new athletes that we're going to need to be reviewed. Are you guys bringing a team reviewer? Is your team reviewer present at the game? We know later in the season, when teams should be in their second, third, fourth event, and i.e., they might not be having the person that serves in a team reviewer role present. But if there's a new athlete there, coordinating that with other teams, making sure that there is someone certified to review that. Because nothing's worse than you go into a tournament, yep, you're focused on the on-court play, but we got this one new athlete that we know we're going to get some game time and hopefully propose a classification, but there's no reviewer that you're competing against on the opposing team that's present that can sign off on that.
Thank you, Brandon. That's one of the things we talked about is that key 3. That's your response, like being able to go back to your team rep and saying, you know what, I know we're going to be going to this tournament. Can you contact the team, the tournament coordinator, see if they're going to have team reviewers there, or we're going to play this team, we're doing a double header. Or is there a team coordinator going to be there because we need some help?
So, Mary, your question there, will the team reviewer certification be extended due to non-play? So the team reviewer certification is every 2 years from the date of completion. So really, and we have that set up as, so you're always staying fresh on the content, regardless of when an individual might be certified. So definitely, obviously, if there's limited play occurring, but it doesn't really affect the time period of 2 years in between you having to recert yourself in the course. But great question. Any other questions? All right, Dave has one here. How does a reviewer handle it when a player has a very different level of function in different fundamental basketball movements? For example, they push like a 4-5, but they rebound like a 2-0 or something like that.
So on that game format form, and there's another one we can put up there. It's kind of when you look at an individual player. So I can get that to Brandon. And what it does is it lets us look at each of those fundamental skills and what class that skill falls under. And then you kind of look and you'll be able to see, well, you know what, when I put it all together, this is kind of where they're at. So if they're pushing like a 3-5, what level is their contact? What is their shooting like? Because rebounding like a 2-0, well, where's their shooting? Where's their free throw? So you're able to break it down by all those fundamental skills and then look and see where do they fall most of the time. So I can get that form to Brandon to put on the website.
Great question, Dave.
I find that form helps when we have people that have a lot of neurological problems or when they have some upper extremity problems. And you just need to step back and look at each skill separately.
So I guess no other questions. You know, I'll wrap things up here long-winded in case someone wants to jump in with one more. But I just want to say, one, first and foremost, thanks to Janie, really serving in this capacity for our organization, taking the time this evening. You know, it's definitely a space that, again, we keep harping on, that it's understand that functional classification system's not an easy one. Funny, while we were sitting here, I was looking at on our website the description under each of the classes, and it's yeah, it can be a handful, especially if you're new to this space. You know, and coming into that role, it could be difficult to have a firm grasp on this. So appreciate all of you guys for your support on this, and I guess in your local communities at the grassroots level. It's really great to see that, you know, a number of people were able to jump on here and educate themselves, hopefully a little bit, and hopefully some takeaways. So yeah, and you know, last but not least, I definitely want to thank Janie and her committee. You know, she has multiple committees that she works with, the Eligibility Committee, Classification Committee, leads some working groups on some other areas. So her contributions and all of those volunteers on those committees are, you know, big help for our organization when we look at classification and eligibility for the NWBA. So with that, thank you all again. I hope you have a safe and healthy future here, and definitely look for more opportunities upcoming on our webinar series for the NWBA. We'll have hopefully another announcement coming up with other educational opportunities for our members. So thank you so much and have a good evening.